joy is directly tethered to our mental, physical, emotional well-being. And the unique thing about joy is that it is as unique as our fingerprints. Like the things that bring you joy are going to be completely different than the things that bring me joy. And honoring those, I tell people that I feel like joy is oxygen to our soul. And when we do not incorporate joy into our lives, then we become a shell of ourselves. And yeah, so I think it's in everyone's best interest that we pursue the things that bring us joy, even if they feel nominal and silly. It's important.
Welcome, Alexis Jones. She's an international recognized speaker, media personality, activist, and author of the New York Times bestselling book, I Am That Girl, which she named after the nonprofit organization she founded. I Am That Girl grew to more than 1 million members with chapters all over the world and attracted the support of a wide range of celebrities, including Kristen Bell, Sophia Bush, Bryce Dallas Howard, Monique Coleman, and many more. Alexis also created ProtectHer, an educational program for male athletes on the importance of respecting women, which grew in popularity and demand during the Me Too era. Prior to her speaking, activism, and literary careers, Alexis appeared as an on-air personality and the cast member of Survivor, and later on Elite 11 on ESPN. She has been featured on Oprah's Super Soul 100, AOL's Makers, Dell's Inspire 100 list, Fast Company's Female Trailblazers, and much more. Now she has welcomed her newest book in June 2023, Joy Hunter, Messy Faceplants, Radical Love, and the Journey That Changed Everything. All right, I'm welcoming on the show Alexis Jones. Thank you so much for being here. As I was saying, I'm so happy we made this time happen because I can't wait to dig into your journey, because I think a lot of people listening right now are really going to find that they relate to your story very much so, even though you might be this, on the outside, people saw you as somebody that created all this success, is doing all these things. I could never be somebody like that. But then to hear your story and the messy middle and all that you've endured over the last few years, they could really find your humanness in this journey, just like us, and how you've kind of rose above all of the struggles you have endured along with all the successes. But anyways, welcome to the show, Alexis. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right. So as I was mentioning, for people that don't know you, I would love if you could kind of share your journey of success and how you got to the point where you were talking internationally on stages, booking speaking events all across the world, also being an activist and having two nonprofits. How did you get to that point? Like, was there something that drove you to be so ambitious, to go after these things boldly and accomplish all that you have?
Absolutely. I think so much of it is just sheer osmosis of growing up with my mom, who was a single mom, who had 5 kids, who was working 2 jobs and going to night school. I think I just witnessed a relentless work ethic, and that there were no excuses for anything. You just got things done. And she was kind of personified that relentless work ethic. So for me growing up, and I remember even in high school, she would say, like, you have one job. It's like it's getting good grades because you have to get into college, because we couldn't afford for any of us to go to school. And she was like, you have to earn a scholarship. Like, that's your job. I do my job. And so from a really young age, I was a freshman when I was 14 years old. I just remember taking that really seriously and being like, okay, I have to make straight A's. I have to get an academic scholarship somewhere. And I think that mentality served me, not only through undergrad and grad school, but then, like you said, it just became, the notion of like, what can't I do? And my mom would always ask the question, like, why not you? And so I think that there was kind of a courage and a bravery mixed, when you mix that with a relentless work ethic. I just think anything is possible. So yeah, I was a driven little gal from a really young age.
Which I think is so amazing because there's obviously so many positives of that is what she instilled in you to be a hard worker, to have great work ethic, to go after things that you possibly like some others wouldn't go after. But I would love to hear maybe the other side of it. How has it maybe uh, hurt you in some regard to
Yeah,
stunt certain areas of yourself? Like I feel there's always, a positive side and a negative side. So I'm
always.
curious yeah. So I would love to hear that side as
Yeah,
well.
I think the cost of that for me was the underlying feeling that nothing was ever good enough, that it actually created a bit of an insatiable hunger for me. And I think also like you said, the other side of that coin was my mom was working 80 hours a week. And so as a little girl, now I can look back with like adult vision, right? Adult brain. But little girl brain was when I do extraordinary things, meaning when I am, the star of the soccer team, or if I'm, the main lead in the play, that what I noticed was that my mom and my dad, who got divorced when I was really young, but they were always sitting there front center. And I think unconsciously, the memo that I got was when I do extraordinary things, I'm rewarded with the presence of my two really hardworking parents. And so that message was like, I have to be extraordinary. Like, I have to
Mm,
be extraordinary to get love. And of course, it took me like years of therapy to understand like being like such a perfectionist and like, again, that insatiable hunger of every single mountain I summited in my career. It was almost like I got to the top. I looked around. I was like, yeah, okay, this is great. Anyway, what's the next mountain? And I
right.
think I didn't learn the component of feeling enough within. So I had created a life where all of my validation, all of my self worth came from the things that I was accomplishing. That in the book I refer to like the shiny things that I could like affix to my jacket, And so I think that was kind of like you said, there's always a pro and a con to everything. And I think in one way, it was awesome. And like you said, I had this crazy work ethic and I had like these audacious dreams and I was like slaying dragons. But on the other side of it, I was never feeling good enough.
Yeah.
I was exhausted. I didn't know how to rest. And I just kept going, just kept saying like, yes, 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 to more and more things. And the reality is that is not sustainable for anyone. And of course, for me, it all came crashing down, which thank God in retrospect. But yeah, I think that was the cost of that kind of insane drive.
And I think it's so important that you shared that because I think there's a lot of people that are perfectionists or that seek to accomplish the next thing. And as you talk about the external validation, so many of us seek that external validation to say we are enough. And I know definitely my journey, I'm sure a lot of people listening right now, the journey of like, for myself at least, the external validation that I'm pretty, that I have a good body, and that's what makes me enough, and that's what's made me liked or lovable. And then also creating success in my career, known as the top of this, that, and the other, like that validated me. And that is not enough to sustain like really, the worth you have with yourself. And so, because that could be taken at any moment, and we'll of course talk about your journey and how that actually happened. But I think that's so important because there is a positive and negative. And so, with great awareness, which you gained through your journey, when everything, if you want to say, crumbled, with that great awareness, you can get more clarity of like what's driving you. So that work ethic, like, is it driving you because you have greater purpose, you're wanting to make an impact, or is it driving you because you feel the need to prove yourself and to have love and receive love? And I think with that awareness, we could at least know, is it coming from something positive or negative? And your journey really unraveled the truth behind that. And so if you could kind of share, so you touched on so many good points, but if you could share kind of what happened, because this was during COVID, which everybody knows, like during the pandemic, COVID, we've experienced really like tons of loss, but there's also been obviously new businesses built, people pivoted, great success came from it. But what I love most importantly is how you talk about the great loss you had and how that basically broke you down, but then you were able to rebuild from those ashes. And so if you could talk about what happened, like what was the catalyst to really transforming really your life, actually.
Yeah, I think that it's cliche for a reason when they say when it rains, it pours. And for me, it was just kind of like everything that I built my foundation on. It felt like everything felt like wildfires in every aspect of my life. So COVID hit, and as you mentioned, I know that so many people lost so many aspects of their life and lost loved ones. And the first thing that happened for me was that I had 150 events on the calendar for 2020, all 150 events, which was my entire income for that year, were canceled within 2 weeks. So that was my entire income, my entire professional identity as a speaker and as someone who was doing live events. So that immediately zeroed me out, and I promptly went on unemployment. And I didn't realize how much ego I had attached to my career and to how much money I made, especially coming from not having money as a little girl and really having a lot of fear around financial scarcity. That all of a sudden I was like back in that place of, oh my gosh, as you said, that was immediately taken away. And around the same time, I found out through ancestry.com that my dad was not my biological father. So that was a big family secret that was revealed. And talk about like, in your brain, you're like, I know 1 + 1 is 2, and that's mom and that's dad. And then all of a sudden it was like, wait, what? What are you saying? So that happened. So, trying to kind of figure out and unravel this family secret. My husband and I had been trying to get pregnant for years. We did IVF. We finally got pregnant. We ended up losing the baby. So it was just kind of like in every single direction, it felt like everything that could possibly go wrong was going wrong. And it was just like one wave of heartbreak after another. And for all my, I have a lot of surfer friends because I lived in California for a decade. And they would talk about every now and again when you would get caught in these waves. And it just felt like you couldn't catch your breath. And it was just like one wave after another. And you're just getting tumbled up and upside down. And that's what it felt like for that period of my life. And I appreciate that you are providing a space to talk about the messiness, because I think so often, especially in podcast world, it's really easy to be like, oh my God, and you've done this and this and this. And like we really elevate the shiny accomplishments in people's lives. And I think sometimes it's a disservice to listeners, because the reality is we are all forever a work in progress. And like, it's
Mhm.
not if, it's when, like, everything kind of falls apart, that we have these different chapters and different seasons in our life. And that season for me was a really devastating, painful, heartbreaking experience of one thing after another. And as you said, of course, there ended up being so much beauty on the other side of it. But I don't think we necessarily take enough time to like really honor um, the messiness, and that we're radically honest and vulnerable about how painful it is when you are in your own season of darkness. And that was certainly a season of darkness for me.
Absolutely. And I think that's so true is we do need to talk about that. That's why I think like we're all in this classroom. Like nobody is absent of class in this life. And it's not if, it's when. Like again, like during COVID, I'm sure everybody that's listening has had their own experience of chaos, if you want to say. And it doesn't have to be on this spectrum per se. Your chaos was chaos enough for you, and
Yeah, exactly.
I can't even imagine. I mean, like, actually, no, I can't imagine it. For 1 second, as you talk about your identity was so wrapped up in your career and what you've built. And I mean, having 100, I forgot what you said, 130, 150 speaking engagements canceled all at once, and then going on unemployment, which I mean, I couldn't even imagine what was going through your mind at this point. I mean, like, that's shock in itself, just that one thing, right? And I know I myself luckily was able to go on unemployment too. I still had some work coming in, but like it's shocking when you've built this success and then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm on, so I definitely want to recognize anybody that experienced that. Like, a lot of us experienced it, even the most successful people, because it was just a chaotic event that again, for people that were in the public eye or people that had to be in a live event, like everything was canceled then. So, and then moving into the ancestry.com, I know there's a story in how you discovered that, which is really, just kind of by fluke, you found this out. And wow, I could only imagine that moment of shock, because it wasn't something you were searching for. It's something that was just, oh, by the way, whoops, hello. Can
Yep,
you share that
exactly.
a little bit?
Yeah, I at the time was doing a speaking tour with Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach called the Together Tour. And Ancestry.com was our biggest corporate sponsor. So we were doing very standard press to get the word out about the tour. And one of the things that we were doing is that we were all going on the show. Ancestry had a TV show where, you would they would reveal all these like very cool aspects of your heritage, and then it was an opportunity for us to talk about like, and we have a speaking, tour that's going on, and go buy tickets. And so it was a very like traditional um, kind of like press thing. And so, like you said, it wasn't like I always knew that there was this, backstory, and I was like trying to find, my biological father. And long story short, I just keynoted at West Point in New York, and it's about an hour and a half drive back to the airport. And my agents called and they said, "We don't know what's going on, but your segment got pulled and they won't tell us why. They'll only speak to you. Ancestry will only speak to you." And I was like, "That's weird." But you live in Hollywood long enough and you're like, "Oh, I get it. They booked a bigger name. They're like, they got Dwayne Johnson. It's fine. It's not personal." So
Yeah.
I hop on the call being like, just assuming that they bumped me because, they got a bigger celebrity or something. And I get on the call, and I remember Jennifer said, "I love my job, but this part of my job is really hard." And I was trying to give her an out. I was like, "It's not a big deal. I understand that you went in another direction," like in quotes, like trying to give her. And she
Right.
was like, "Oh no, you have no idea why I'm calling, do you?" And I was like, "No, what's going on?" And she said the 16 words that changed my life forever, which was, "The information that you provided for your biological father is incorrect." And that phrase would be the invitation to then dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And, at the time I was like, "This is professionally reckless and you clearly made a mistake." And, I was just
Yeah.
like saying all sorts of stuff to like make it not true. And she said, "You'll probably want to have a conversation with your mom." And then, not to give too much of it away, but it ends up being this really radical story of like the most powerful choice to love a child
Mm.
that isn't yours biologically. And so, of course, my mom and I have a conversation. I eventually bring it to my dad. I tried to actually keep it a secret from my dad for a period of time. I thought I was going to break his heart. And so that was a really scary moment of, oh my gosh, if I tell my dad, is he still going to love me? And this is like my dad who coached everything I ever played, who's like incredibly involved in my life, my real life Superman. And so there was, a hesitancy, like the little girl in me was like, "Oh my God, if I tell my dad, is he going to look at me the same?" Um, and so I tried to keep that secret. And then finally I was like, "This just isn't my secret to hold. This isn't my shame. This isn't my guilt to hold." And so I finally came clean. And then the real secret was revealed, which was him saying, "I've actually always known."
Mm.
And in that moment, that was a revelation of radical love that I'd never imagined in my entire life. And that was also very informative because eventually we would end up having to get an egg donor for us to become parents. And so it was this really symbiotic moment where,
Wow.
years before we knew that we would have to get an egg donor and that I am not the biological mother of my now son, that
Mm.
I would have this incredible experience of being the recipient of that kind of love. So it's kind of a crazy story of how it all
Wow.
unfolds. But I think the biggest takeaway through all of everything of losing an identity, and as you said, for those listening, I can really relate on all of those fronts. Loss of identity in so many different ways, whether it's career, whether it's the loss of a child or a dream. Um, and I think the biggest through line has always been that there's purpose to pain. And in that experience of finding out my dad was not my biological father, what a gift it ended up being on the other side of it, as I now was so confident that I could love my son regardless of it, of, you know, the biology. The biology actually doesn't matter when it comes to parenthood. It just matters whether or not you show up every single day and choose to love that child. Yeah, and
That's
I'd
so
been the recipient
remarkable.
of that love, so I knew I
How
could give it.
crazy is that? That's full circle, like how that, like, because of course, when you lost your child through IVF, um, I don't know if this be the truth, but when I first heard that story of yours, I was curious, based on everything else I know, was it possibly because the stress you were having at that time, or like,
Absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, and absolutely, and also we'll never know. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I think that I also like give that up to like unseen forces at play, and I truly believe that there is a divine perfect plan in store for all of us. And looking back though, I mean the insanity, and that's part of it, is like now where I'm sitting, the insanity of being on the road 250 days a year, and me thinking like I don't understand why my body isn't capable of getting
right,
pregnant. You're like,
of
because
course,
I'm not sleeping, because I have chronic pain, because you know my I was existing off of fumes, and I'm like asking my body to do this unimaginable miracle in the midst of like I'm barely functioning. And so I look
wow,
back and I'm like, it's insane that I thought my physical body was capable of creating a life while simultaneously the way that I was treating it was such disregard and such disrespect. And that I had the audacity to get on stage and talk about self care and self love.
mm,
And like, I wasn't doing any of that. So I was completely out of alignment with what I was preaching and how I was actually operating in my own private life. And I think that level of fraudulency, that so many things, especially that alignment of coming, you know, to a place where I could really speak from a level of authenticity of now the things that I say I'm actually doing in my life, not perfectly, wildly imperfectly, but if I'm saying things now, it is because I'm working really hard to honor those things within myself. So now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, the fact that I had the audacity to ask that of my body and then be shocked when she was protecting me by saying, oh, sister, like you cannot like take this on in addition to this life, that this plate that is so full, you cannot add one more morsel of food to this plate that is like spilling over. So I think, again, looking back for me and my experience, all of that pain led me to making very different choices in my life. That now, you know, when we were able to finally get pregnant and sustain that pregnancy, that I'm like, yeah, of course, because I'm sure my cortisol levels, my stress levels were like, you know, a fraction of what they were before. So I always say sometimes things have to go really terribly wrong in order to go terribly right.
so good. I think what you just shared right now, I think is something that somebody listening right now needed to hear, because how many people are like saying yes to so many things because you feel like you'll miss out on this opportunity or this won't build your business. Like, I need to show up to this to make this happen and all the things, but you're running on fumes. And I
Yeah.
love that you say that, because I think so very often when we're like going, we don't even like recognize like how. I actually had this conversation with my the other day. Like, I was saying to him, I'm like, I'm so stressed, but I'm almost like not even realizing I'm stressed. Like, I don't
Yeah.
feel stressed, but I know I'm stressed, but I'm not
Hmm.
even like acknowledging it because I'm just doing the things. Right. And so I
Yeah.
think that's so true. Is like sometimes we don't even recognize like that we are like literally like just burnt out, and
Yeah.
we're just running on our adrenaline, or the need to, check this off the box or accomplish this goal or maintain our success. And I
Yeah.
think the only time we could recognize that, at least I remember, like, one of my biggest breaking moments was exactly the catalyst that got me to do the work on myself, like, very intentionally. Like, there's one thing doing the work and like
Yeah.
self-care practices and all these things, but like when you're intentional, like, hey, I'm going to like take time, turn off this, turn off that, put some boundaries up because this time is to honor myself and to get radically honest and clear, like what is not working and what do
Yeah.
I need to do to shift into a new reality that I get to choose to create. And so I love that. So your book, which I'm going to just like, we were talking about this before we press record, how much I freaking love this book cover, Joy Hunter, which is your newest book, Messy Face Plans, Radical Love, and the Journey That Changed Everything. So I love this book. I have been digging into it. First of all, like I said, I absolutely love it. Everybody go grab it. It will be in the show notes. But let's talk about this. So the Joy Hunter, your journey. So as we were talking about, like sometimes we don't notice when things are wrong until sometimes we have to like actually like plant our face down and like everything needs a break so that we can then rebuild. That is so, so scary. And I think nobody chooses to do that. We sometimes like it just needs to happen. I like to say I'll keep getting the lesson until I learn it because I feel like
Yep.
life is just teaching us the lessons. And my breaking moment was again that waterfall moment. Like it didn't rain, it poured. Like everything seemed to be like being thrown at me, chaos. And this was like, I think this was like 6 years ago. It was insane. Like if I were to share the story of everything that happened, it was absolutely insane. But I needed that to happen for me to like actually change. Like
Yeah.
something big needed to happen. And I don't think that needs to happen to everybody, but I think a lot of people have probably been in that experience where like enough is enough. Like I won't settle for what's happening. And so I want people to, at least through your journey, not need to get to that breaking moment, but
Sure.
learn from what you arrived at, or I don't like to say arrived, what you discovered in your journey of joy hunting. So first of all, did you, when all this happened, and I know obviously the journey you went on, was it in as an intent to like reinvent yourself or rediscover yourself or, like find yourself, or was that your intention, or was it like I'm just letting go and letting life unfold where it may because I have obviously no control of anything?
Yeah. No, it was definitely the latter. Which is funny because my intention was not like, you know what, I'm gonna rent an RV and I'm gonna invite my our best friend who's also heartbroken and we're gonna go on this epic road trip across America and then I'm gonna write this incredible book and hopefully, like no, oh my God. At the time it was like, get me the hell out of here. Like that was all I knew was that it literally felt like in every direction it was pouring, like you said, right? Like in every direction, it was like, I just need to hit eject. And that's what our road trip was it was early COVID. It was shelter in place. And in Texas, it was already 100 degrees every day. So there, the idea that we were just like stuck in our house, we were, grieving our miscarriage, which I don't think anyone is ever meant to grieve in isolation. Um, so really it was an absolute just hitting eject. Like I just have to get out of this situation. And then of course it ended up being the most beautiful journey month on the road, where all these lessons were teed up. And I actually think that to me, that was like one of the biggest epiphanies was that I had been operating at such a velocity, like it's such a speed. And I really can relate when you were saying like, oh my God, I'm so stressed, but I don't even feel it. And I think our physical bodies are such wisdom keepers and our bodies are such truth tellers. And I think that for me, like the physical pain in my body, like my neck was hurting, my lower back was hurting, like
Mm,
the wheels were coming off in my life, needless to say. And I think the irony is that when I got in that RV and just hit eject on my life and we went out into the open road, it was the first time that I could remember in maybe a decade where I had like nothing planned, where like the only intention was I just didn't want to be crying in my living room in my house any longer. Like I just needed a new place to be. And I think that there's something really powerful about that stillness in that space. And I also want to couch that with I recognize the privilege of being able to take time and being able to have
mm,
space. Because I had a lot of friends who are working full time, who are like, oh, it must be nice. You got to like hop in an RV and go, travel around the country. And obviously, shelter in place helped, provided us that opportunity because we were all technically working from home. But regardless, I just think that offering ourselves that space and time, my goodness, like that's when all of the like wisdom and all of the lessons and all of the, you know, that's when, at least for me, when everything was offered to me, was like the noise in my life had gotten so loud that I
Mm.
couldn't hear my internal voice asking, for change. And so, like you said, I think it's really different for everyone. And, for some people, like their entire world has to be burned down the way that mine was in order to get my attention. I feel like God was like, I'm going to burn it all down because you won't stop.
Pay
And if the
attention.
time, I think, yeah, I think at the time, and I always tell people, like, when someone's really going through it, whatever their heartbreak or disappointment or dark season, it's never the time to be like, you know what? I bet this is going to be a blessing in disguise. You're like, that's when you don't say that. You just like sit with them in the darkness and just say, this is so hard and I'm so sorry. And I'll sit here with you for as long as you want or need me. However, it is true, certainly for me, that there absolutely is beauty and gifts and lessons on the other side of the hardest stuff. I think, unfortunately, the hardest stuff in our life is our invitation to learn the most meaningful lessons. And to your point, that the meaningful lesson for me again was that notion that there is purpose to every single painful thing that we experience, and time is really the only revealer of that purpose. And again, looking back, listen, I needed to get off the train. I was on like a speeding bullet train, and I really feel like everything going wrong was a divine invitation for me to change the trajectory of where I was headed. And now I look at my life and it's like, if I would have ever thought I would be zooming your, like how doing this podcast from Bozeman, Montana, where I now live,
Right.
I would have said you were completely crazy. And so, yeah, things had to change. And sometimes it takes some really painful rerouting. But I do believe that for me, it was a divine intervention.
Mm. I completely agree that just knowing your story, I think it was necessary. It's what needed to happen for you to actually like start to love yourself again and honor you
Mhm.
and your worthiness of you are everything enough without all these accolades, all these successes, and needing to do this, needing to show up for this, needing to impact this person or whatever it may be. It's like, how about just honoring you for a moment? Like
Yeah.
that's really what everybody deserves, and then everybody is worthy just for who they are, not what they do and all these external validations. And I think one of the things that, as you talked about, not everybody had the privilege, or let's say at this present moment, not everybody has the privilege, if you want to say, to escape the things
Sure.
that are happening. Sorry, I hear an echo. I don't know if that, okay, it stopped. So, for those people that are listening that feel like they're not loving the space they're in right now, the situation they're in, that they're just going, and like burning the candle at two ends. What would you suggest to them to, like, I like to say there's a power in the pause. And that's kind of what you talked about. It's like
Mhm.
we need to
I love
create
that.
a space to go quiet so that all those external noises can, kind of dissipate so that we could then hear our own voice and really what we need, like get really clear on that. Because I think the only way is in that piece that we could find clarity. But what would you suggest in your own words, like what somebody should do if they feel like, they can't escape something and maybe they don't have the
Mhm.
time to slow down
Yeah.
because they still need to pay their bills? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly feels like the season that I'm in right now with a baby, which is there's a relentlessness of like you don't really get a day off anymore because my son requires around the clock care. And one thing that I've noticed for myself, especially in this very particular season, where I have less time for myself, which is taking those 5 minutes at a time. When he goes down for a nap. For me, I find like what are the things that are actually nourishing? Scrolling on social media is not nourishing for me. And that's like just a really tangible, practical tip, right? Is that when I get 5 or 10 minutes to myself, it's like, well, what are things that I can actually do to be still and to honor myself? And for me, a lot of times social media is like a love-hate relationship, but it's like death by comparison. And especially when you're a new mom and you're like, oh my God, the freedom I used to have. Like now I'm like before a podcast being like, oh, what's that in my hair? Oh, cool, cool, cool. It's just a little bit of throw up. It's fine. And you're just like in a different season where it's really easy to like scroll through other people's Instagram and be like, wow, their lives look so shiny. And so, like I said, I'm really into like very practical advice. But for me, it's like whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 10 minutes, now it's, sitting outside and just letting the sunshine like warm my face. Like that to me is just like sitting out there and taking deep breaths. And like whether it's a mantra, whether it's connecting with the God of my understanding, whether it's calling a friend, and venting about being a new mom or just being like, tell me I'm doing a good job, but it's like these really intentional things that fill up my tank. And again, whether that's stillness, whether that's stepping out into nature and putting my feet physically on the ground, whether that's calling a friend, whether that is inviting someone over and just saying, I just need to be in community. I just need to physically be with another person right now. I think that that's different for every person of like what fills your love tank. But being, like I said, really intentional with choosing that over quote unquote filling time.
Yeah.
And filling time for me can be, scrolling or, watching a show. And certainly there's times where it's just nice to do some mindless things. But I think that real connection with self and connection with other people is this stuff that I don't know. It's just, it gives me energy to keep going.
Absolutely. And that reminds me, like I like to share a lot that something is like creating your joy list, talking about Joy Hunter is create a list, like dump everything on a list of what brings you joy, what lights you up, what makes you come alive. And it could be the silliest, most stupidest thing, but list it. And then I
Yeah,
think you should, from that list, maybe pull out the top 10 and then ask yourself, like, am I scheduling this in my days or weeks? And, how am I making time for this? And if not, okay, maybe for me, I love being in sunlight. I love being around
mhm,
nature. So I got to schedule it in. Like I'm going to make time during this time to get outside and go for a walk. And just those little things, like that's adding to your cup, just little bits adding to your cup. And I think that, at least will fill up your cup while doing the other things that maybe drain you a little bit more, but
absolutely.
at least you're not like depleting and just like
Yeah,
constantly being on empty. So yeah, I think
I
that's a
think it's
beautiful practice.
Yeah, and I think especially as an adult, it's almost like our the seriousness in our life, the accountability, the responsibility, it's almost like the dial to all of those things get turned up because all of a sudden you have a mortgage and you have,
Right.
bills to pay and you have like real consequences for bad decisions. And I think becoming a parent only amplifies that even more, only turns it up even more because now, you talk about responsibility and accountability, you have a tiny human like relying on you to exist. And I think while we're turning those qualities up, I think it's almost like spontaneity and joy and fun. Not only do they not get turned up equally, I actually think they get turned down, if not off. And I think it's the reason people are like, and then I had a midlife crisis and I don't know where it came from. And it's like, bro, because you had 2 decades of like not doing anything fun and
So
anything
true.
that, like what we've been talking about that fills your cup. So I love, again, just like really tangible, practical things. And you saying like, write down, like pull out your phone, like in your notes section, write down the things that uniquely, even if they feel silly, that
Yeah.
uniquely bring you joy. And whether that's like getting your favorite ice cream from the ice cream shop, or whether that's reading your favorite book, or whether it's making that perfect cup of coffee the exact way that you love it, or for you going out in nature, or, being active, whatever that is. I think, and then I love the next step that you just said, which is it's not enough to just have a list, although it is really helpful because when you find a pocket of time to literally be able to reference and to be like, ooh, what are the things that like, fill me up? But I loved your second bit of advice, which is like, schedule it. Like, and by the way, depending on the season, maybe you're only able to schedule one of those things a month.
Right.
That's okay. But the idea that you are intentionally refilling your tank up, because I mean, we all know the analogy, right? Like on the plane and you got to put your oxygen mask on first. Like there's a reason for that, because if we are not filled up, we don't have anything to give. So it's actually in everyone in our lives' best interest that we are the good kind of selfish that says, here are, 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 things that I'm doing, every month intentionally, so that, I'm full and vibrant. And I tell people that I'm like, listen, joy is not a nice to have. Joy is directly tethered to our mental, physical, emotional well-being. And the unique thing about joy is that it is as unique as our fingerprints. Like the things that bring you joy are going to be completely different than the things that bring me joy. And honoring those, I tell people that I feel like joy is oxygen to our soul. And when we
100%.
do not incorporate joy into our lives, then we become a shell of ourselves. And yeah, so I think it's in everyone's best interest that we pursue the things that bring us joy, even if they feel nominal and silly. It's important.
Absolutely. I think what's key is like awareness plus action equals change. Like if you're not
Hmm.
liking your situation, you need to, number one, be clear, like have awareness what's going on.
Yep.
And then put action. And that's the intentionality. Like where are you going to schedule it in? And then that will create a ripple effect and create eventually change in your life and head you towards where you want to go. And I think all of us need to be reminded of this, myself included. Again,
Hmm.
we're still on this journey in life. Like we're going to mess up. It's not going to be perfect. So I think, just being reminded of that. And I think that's what's really great is like, I think that we have to constantly become silent, if you want to say, so we could gain that clarity, like what's not working, like what is off, like recognizing what's
Yeah.
off in our body, how are we feeling, and then being intentional. And the next thing we could do, like a small little action for change. One thing I would love to know is, so part of your journey was like this rediscovering I actually heard you, it wasn't, you said it was a remembering of
Hmm.
yourself opposed to just a rediscovering of who you are. But I do think that's what a lot of people need is like, who are you really? Like, who are you to the core of your soul? Not all these, again, successes or accolades, like everything that your identity is tied to. It's like, who are you? Like what do you love about yourself, and how do you cultivate self-love and self-acceptance? So I would love to know your relationship of how you've cultivated that on your journey, like in your remembering of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think this is probably different for everyone, but for me, I think one of the best love languages to connect with myself is journaling. And a lot of that is just because it's a physical, for me, it's a physical act of meditation. And actually it is a way that I can like check in with myself. So this may sound really weird to people, but I'll straight up ask myself questions in my journal, like, hey girl, how are you? Like, what's going on? Like, what's
Okay.
hard this week? And I find that in answering those questions, really basic questions, just like kind of a check in, that it is a way for me to reconnect with my body, to reconnect with like, wow, how am I actually feeling? And I think we underestimate how important that relationship is with ourselves. And when we think about our relationships with other people, it's like, yeah, we go and have coffee with people and we're like, tell us the latest. What's going on? How's your life? How are your kids? It's like we ask people questions because that is how we relate to people. That's how we, like get updates on their life. And so for me, that is just a way that I know no one's ever going to read my journals. I know that I can be like brutally honest. And it's a way for me to have a physical meditation where I have like a physical thing that I'm doing. And in it, a lot of times I like write myself love letters. I write myself encouragement and I say, you know what, just so you know, like, I think you're a really badass mom. And I want to acknowledge like the other day when you did X, Y, and Z and you were able to like self-regulate when your kid was like having a meltdown, and like that was awesome, because if we can't be our biggest champions. If we can't be the ones, because we see everything, we know all the things that we do, and to be able to acknowledge and validate that for ourselves, I think is like a whole new self love practice for me, which is just that acknowledgement and offering a gentle love instead of a critical love, which I was like the queen of judgment of, again, nothing ever being good enough, being a total perfectionist, like always pointing out my flaws. And I have a really imperfect practice now of working to be really gentle with myself. And when I do something that I'm like, oh God, I could have done that better. Like, how would I talk to my best friend in that situation? I'd be like, man, you tried. Like, you did awesome. Like, it's okay. And like, I'm working on shifting my internal language of how I talk to myself to be loving and gentle and grace filled, and encouraging. And I think that that has been a complete shift in my life, has just been, how can I be a better friend to myself? Like, how
Mm.
can I, in real time, practice a lot more love as opposed to criticism? So that's, yeah, I think the physical journaling, I don't know, there's just something really powerful to me about having a place where I can check in with myself. It isn't just me trying to meditate and then falling asleep 6 minutes into my meditation. So that's the other thing, is
Right.
journaling keeps me actually awake, which is helpful. But yeah,
I love that. I love that you shared that, and also having grace for yourself and being kind to yourself, because I think everybody listening right now has talked really poorly to themselves. And I think having that awareness to, give yourself grace, that like,
yeah.
I actually listened to a great podcast this morning, a simple 10-minute episode. And he was talking about, it was actually a message from Mel Robbins. And she says, like, people, when they start something new, they have imposter syndrome. And she's like, stop calling it imposter syndrome. Call yourself a beginner. Like, just
Mm,
that reframe, I was like,
I love
wow,
it.
that was actually like, just that reframe, listening to that made me reflect on that, because I'm like, that's so true. It's like everybody's a beginner. And so, like, if you call yourself a beginner, you're not going to do it perfectly the first time. Yes, you're going to mess up, but yet you're going to learn. So imagine like
Mhm.
just that reframe, as you said, like, how could you change the words you talk to yourself? Like, just that reframe, I think, will give yourself grace in the process of becoming, you know, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Becoming really great in something that you're doing.
Yeah,
Like, obviously, the more you do it, the better you're going to get, and you're just going to learn along the way, and like, how fun. So, like,
yeah.
just like, that's just a great reframe. So I think that's beautiful, to like just be kind and give yourself grace. Like, you're not going to, like, you've never been a mom before. You're just learning along the way. Like, oh, at
Mhm.
least with your awareness that, like, oh, maybe I could have done that better. Like, if you're always checking in with yourself, at least you could reroute.
Yep,
And I think
exactly.
that's really key. And I think that, I would love to know, now that you have been through your journey, you're living in Montana right now, which I know living in Montana was actually a call, that you had a gut feeling like, this is where I want to be. And you uprooted your whole entire life. So it's funny, I like know your whole story, but you uprooted your whole life from Texas, born and raised there, and you left everything, because that was really, your whole family was there, and just your career. Obviously, well, I mean, you traveled internationally, but to listen to that call, that gut feeling that you belong somewhere else, I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of people that don't listen to that, because again,
Yeah.
they're tied to something like this responsibility. Oh, like, I need to be there for my parents, but they don't. I think there's many people that are like, oh, I have to take care of my parents because they're older. I need to be here. So this is what I need to do. But like, what if they're being called somewhere else to, like, you know, honor themselves and their journey in life? Like, what do you do when you're pulled
Yeah.
between both things? That's a hard one. And I don't think anybody has really an answer for that. But I do think, like, how do we begin to listen to that gut feeling more, and know that, like, having the courage to, like, go for it, right? What would you say?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I think, when people ask me and we talk about bravery, and I say for a long time, I thought bravery, I defined bravery as these really kind of external displays of kind of craziness. Like I jumped out of planes and I hiked the biggest mountains in the world and I swam with sharks and I like did these like really kind of daring things. And I got so much credit for being so brave. And yet the reality is I actually now look at bravery completely different, which is these much more subtle honoring of intuition. And our decision to move to Montana was one of the scariest decisions I ever made because it was the first time in my entire life that I wasn't making a choice from my head. It was the first time I
Mm.
was ever like really listening to my heart. And I
Wow.
remember telling my husband, and it actually was a reason that I ended up naming the book Joy Hunter, is I said, I don't know how to explain it. And I'm someone who like, speaks and uses like language is my thing, like words are my thing. And I remember being like, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know like the right words, but all I
Wow.
can say is that when I'm in Montana, it brings me actual joy. That's all I know. And that was like long before I ended up naming the book Joy Hunter and like ended up kind of going on this joy, tour. Um, but at the time it felt right. And ironically, it was also the first time that it actually made zero sense, like from a mental standpoint, like our entire lives, all of our family, we are two homegrown Austin kids. My husband had played professional basketball and had retired from that and was in commercial real estate in Austin, which was like the biggest boom town in the
Booming.
entire
Yeah.
country.
Wow.
And here I am like saying we should move to Bozeman, Montana, that only is 50,000 people. And I remember him being like, that doesn't make sense. Like I can't transfer my job there. I can't be successful and make as much money there as I'm making here. And we don't have any family in Bozeman. Like, what are you? And I remember like my whole family being like, you're crazy. Like
Mm.
she's having like a third life crisis. Like something is happening because again, two hometown Austin kids, all of our family lives in Austin.
Yeah.
His job was in Austin. We're talking about having a kid. We had five grandparents within 15 minutes. I mean, everything about it didn't make sense. And I'm so grateful to have a partner who, at the end of the day, when I said, I know this doesn't make sense, but it feels right
Wow.
to me, that he honored that. And he said,
Amazing.
okay, then we will figure it out. And we really took the idea of worst case scenario. And this is the beautiful thing. If there's like one takeaway for anyone listening, like the beautiful thing about being a human being is that you can make a choice. And if you don't like that choice, guess what? You get to make another one. And I remember
Mm.
my husband being like, okay, like we'll move there for 6 months. If it doesn't work out, we don't love it. We realize it is totally insane. We will pack everything up in our U-Haul and we will move back home. And I was like, okay, really? Wait, what? And what I always tell people is it's one thing to like have a dream, right? And this was clearly like a dream for me, was all of a sudden like, and I didn't even know that this was like this dream existed inside of me until I came to Bozeman, Montana. And like you said
Mm.
it earlier in the podcast, like for whatever indescribable reason, it felt like home. It felt like home in a way that I couldn't describe. And it was this huge leap of faith. And by the way, when you have a dream, I think the scariest thing is when that dream actually comes true, because then you're like, oh my God, wait, what? Is this really happening? And I remember the night before the U-Haul was showing up the next day and we packed everything up. We were literally moving to Montana the next day. And in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up in a like panicked sweat. And I woke my husband up and I was like, oh my God, this is the worst idea ever. I don't know what I'm thinking. Like, I'm clearly like out of my mind. We can't leave Texas. We're like fifth generation Texans. Like, this is where our family is. This is our home. And I just had this total freak out of like, no, I'm making a mistake. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I asked this of you. Like, we need to stay here because this is where we're quote unquote comfortable. And
Mm.
everything Montana represented was discomfort. And
Wow.
and yet there was still this compulsion for it. And thank God I had a husband who said, absolutely not. I know that this feels good and this feels right. And I know that you're scared
Wow.
because it's scary to take a big leap of faith, but we're going to do it. Because I was fully prepared to like call off the entire thing. And he was like, nope, we're
Wow.
going. and we're going to figure it out. And he kept saying, worst case scenario, we're going to move home in 6 months. I'm not worried about it, but we need to honor this for you. Like whatever this is,
Your
like,
husband, wait,
and
hold on. Your husband's amazing.
he's
That's just
amazing.
I mean, that's just
He's an
remarkable.
amazing, amazing partner. Yeah, there's no question.
So awesome. But that's the thing is change is scary
Terrifying.
for everybody.
Yeah.
When you're going into any uncomfortable zone, like something you're not familiar with, you're going to feel like self-doubt. I think that's the
Yep.
hardest thing. Like I've talked to a couple people on the podcast recently about building self-trust, and I've brought up this conversation a lot because I think I struggle with it. I think a
Yep.
lot of people do is like, how do we trust like that gut feeling, like where we feel this tug or this isn't right, like, where to go. And it's
Yeah.
really hard. But I think the only way, at least this is my opinion, I would love to hear your opinion. I
Yeah.
think the only way we could cultivate self-trust is by when we say we're going to do something, we do it. And then if it doesn't work out, okay, I learned that doesn't work out. What's another
Yep.
option? Like you said, the power of choice. And, the more you step into the things you say you're going to do, like you said, like you committed to, and your husband's like, no, we're doing it
We're
anyways
doing
because you
it.
said this is
Totally.
what it's like, but then it's so easy for that self-doubt to creep in. And that's why we don't accomplish so many things like our dreams, is because we settle back into that fear.
Yeah.
And I think that once you do things like creating your joy list and scheduling it in and saying you're going to do something, do it. All these actions is number one, the way to build your self-love, self-confidence, and also move you closer to what feels right to you.
Yeah.
And noticing when things don't feel right, when you feel like, you were talking about earlier in the episode that you were like the yes gal, you were saying yes to all these
Totally.
things, like yes to this opportunity, but like how many people say yes to things that they know are really not going to serve them? Like, for
Hmm.
example, I don't know, sleep is a big thing to me right now. And so like, and also my energy and all these things, like you get more clear, the older you get, the clearer you get,
Yeah.
hopefully with your getting to know yourself more. But like, let's say you say yes to this event, it's going to be late and it's like, I don't know. Yes, you'll have good conversations with people. You never know who you're going to meet. So sometimes saying yes is the right thing, but like, you just know it's not necessarily the best thing for you now because tomorrow morning you have to wake up early to do an interview or whatever it may be, or a speaking event. So I think it's just like the more we could get really clear on what feels right to us, and
Hmm.
you know and even if you do something that that was a gut feeling you had, like, and it doesn't turn out the way you anticipated it will, you're just gonna, at least it was your decision, it wasn't somebody else's. You didn't like, you'll at least have like, okay, that's my responsibility. I can make a different choice now. It's not somebody else pushed it on you. you
Yep.
know
Exactly. Well, and I think
yeah.
there's so many people who think that they have a dream. This has been a really interesting thing recently. Was I had a friend who like spent her whole life thinking that she was in the wrong career, that she really wanted to be a singer. That was the thing that she wanted to do. And she just felt like she had like missed her window to do it. And she and I had a conversation and I said, go do voice lessons and like go do, like pursue it. And you can do that on the side while you're still doing your career. And 6 months into her like really giving it a go, of like getting voice lessons and like, trying to put together a band and and about 6 months in, she called me and she was like, you're never going to believe it. And I was like, what's that? And she was like, I don't actually want to be a singer. And I was like,
Yeah,
what? And
there
she was
you
like,
go.
yeah, I think I had this dream when I was a little girl and I always thought I wanted to do this. But the truth is like, I actually don't love it. Like, I don't love the voice lessons. I don't love the whatever. Like, there's other things I would rather be doing. And she called just to say, I want to thank you so much because I think I would have
Mm.
spent my whole life thinking that this is what I wanted to do when in reality, after actually trying it, I really don't. But now I don't have to live with this thinking that there's this other life that I think I want and like ruining like her, current experience. And so that's why, to your point of like, go and do it, like whatever it is, because again, like we could have moved to Montana and in 6 months been like, that was a wild hair. Good, like, yep, we're headed back home. That was fun, like quite the adventure. And then we would have spent the next 30 years like laughing about like, remember when we like moved to Montana for 6 weeks?
Yeah.
That was so random. But I wouldn't have spent a lifetime either resenting myself or resenting my husband and being like, oh my God, like this unrealized dream that I thought I wanted. Because a lot of times you try something and then you realize actually it isn't what I want, but how amazing to know that. Like, what incredible
Right.
information to be like, oh, okay, cool. I can cross that off my list. And a lot of time they're just like echoes of like dreams that we had when we were children that we've outgrown. And like, how great to give it a whirl, because no matter what, it either lights you up and is like the right choice, and or you make that choice and you realize like, actually this old sweater that I put back on is like too tight and it doesn't fit and it's kind of itchy. I'm going to give this away. Like, I actually don't want this anymore. And I think that is equally valuable,
Mm.
to chase things down and to cross them off your list. Because I think that's like the biggest regrets that I hear people talk about are the what ifs. Like, those are the things that I think
100%.
haunt us on our deathbed, or the what ifs. What if I would have done that? What if I would have called that person? What if I would have, you know, and gosh, it's just so avoidable. It's so avoidable to just like go out and give it a whirl. And at least it's better than like sitting on your couch wondering what it could have been like.
Absolutely. And obviously, Montana worked out because you're still here a couple years after. So I would love to know what, and I want to honor your time, but I would love to know now that you've gone through this joy hunting journey and you've discovered so much about yourself and got clarity on and awareness over, like I talked about, how do you operate now differently in your career?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's,
Great
I
question.
think, what I would love to
Um,
know.
yeah. One thing I think, the pendulum swung so far one way, which was my entire life I'd been defined by my accomplishments. And then it swung so far the other way for 3 years and through COVID, not having speaking engagements. I kind of went into a hole and wrote this book. But as anyone who's ever written a book, for 2 years, you're basically like a hermit behind a screen, like typing on your computer. So there was like literally zero external validation because I wasn't on any stages, I wasn't speaking publicly. And now I think I've come back to, and I think balance can be an equal pursuit of perfection. I don't think there's ever like, I don't think it's ever equal. I don't think in partnership that it's 50-50. I don't think like life work balance. And I'm like, balance is just like a secret word to like still seek perfection. However,
Mm.
I have found that being creative in how I put my schedule together and knowing that I have very real limitations and boundaries around time away from my now son, who's almost 8 months old, that he's a huge
Oh, so
priority
young.
for me. That I still get to do things like this, right? I still get to engage in work that's really meaningful to me, but work is not the sole source of my validation anymore. And I think that has been a game changer, that at the end of the day, it's really, and it kind of brings the conversation full circle, but it's really about motives. I still love standing on stages, giving speeches. That matters to me. That's something that, speaking of filling me up, like that's something that fills me up. But I don't need to do it 250 days a year, because I now have other ways to also fill myself up and to validate myself. So now it's, again, a very um, imperfect pursuit of doing the things that fill me up while also, um, I don't know, like chasing big dreams, like I haven't stopped being a big dream chaser. I just can now counterbalance that with really quiet, intimate moments that aren't being posted about, or, articles aren't being written about. And I think that has been a really beautiful addition to my life.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Love that. Well, I of course will plug your book, Joy Hunter, in the show notes. And then also, I know there's so many other things you've done, but do you still have your two nonprofits,
I am that
Project
girl
Her?
and ProtectHer. Yeah, I'm still doing work with both of those.
Amazing.
And yeah, that's such an outlet, as we mentioned before. The activist inside of me, I think it was just like the activist, storyteller, speaker, author. Like that used to be the only way I defined myself. And I love that I can still do work on the things, that are meaningful to me, but that I also have this whole other part of me that doesn't have to be on the road. It doesn't have to be validated by strangers, which feels good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I'll plug everything in the show notes. And of course, people could
Thank
follow
you.
along your journey and see what else is coming up because I know there's other things in the work. I would love to close in asking you the question I ask all my guests. So, if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've learned in your journey, and you just feel it's something you have to shout out to the world, what would that piece of wisdom be and why?
Whew, good question. I think it would be my mom used to always say when I was young that this too will pass. And at the time, it really was about hardship and heartbreak and painful moments. But what I've also realized is that this too will pass, which are like the joyful, exciting, spontaneity, that everything is temporary. And so it allows us in, I think, the moments that hurt the most to know that there's an end point, but also it's allowed me to really sink into the gratitude of like when my son is giggling, that I'm like, oh God, I just want to be so present for all these little moments too, because I blinked and he's 8 months old. So I think the idea of this too will pass now means to me the idea of like being radically present with whatever is, because inevitably we're going to blink and that moment's going to be over. So yeah, soaking it all up, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between.
Wow, that's so great. I never thought of it, that message in helping you actually be more present. And that's so profound because that's so true is like everything like we're about to be the end of the year. We're like Christmas is around the corner. I mean, you could kind of start saying that in January, like Christmas is around the corner because that's how
Yeah.
fast it seems to come. It's so surreal, but I love that message. Thank you for sharing that. Well,
Of
where could
course.
everybody follow along and find you most to learn more about you?
Yeah, on social media at Alexis Jones and my website, alexisjones.com are the best places to find me.
Awesome. I love this conversation so much. Thank you so much, Alexis, for your time. There's so many gems in this whole everything we talked about today, but I know there's so much more. So everybody go follow Alexis and learn more about everything she shares. And also there's a lot of great interviews you've had as well with other people that have gone deeper. And yeah, there's just so much wisdom in everything. So thank you for everything today.
Thank you so much for having me.